Explosive decompressions can cause a serious threat to life on board an aircraft. Thankfully, such incidents are rare, but of those which have occurred, one stands out as a particularly incredible story of survival. This is the incredible and terrifying story of British Airways Flight 5390. Welcome to the Crafty Cryptid, a channel dedicated to the eerie, the chilling, and the insane. If you enjoy this type of content, click subscribe and ding the notification bell. I post on this channel once a week. Today, let's take a look at the thrilling tale of Flight 5390. It was June 10th, 1990. The skies were clear, and despite the aircraft operating outside of British school holiday dates, it was still decently full. 81 passengers and 6 crew were on board that day. The flight itself was taking place inside a stretched BAC 111-500. This had a maximum capacity of 119 passengers seated 5 abreast. It departed Birmingham at 0820 local time. The takeoff was uneventful, and the passengers and crew were prepared for an ordinary flight, just as was always the case. The plane climbed into the sky out of Birmingham and headed for Spain. First Officer Alistair Aitchison handed control of the plane over to Captain Tim Lancaster once they had taken off, and for a solid 13 minutes, everything was business as usual. But at 8:33 local time, at an altitude of 17,300 feet over the railway town of Didcot, Oxfordshire, tragedy would strike. It was sudden. It was shocking. No one expected the window on Captain Lancaster's side to suddenly explosively separate from the plane. Furthermore, no one expected Captain Lancaster himself to be sucked out of the plane almost entirely. In a terrifying turn of events, the force of the explosive decompression caused by the window blowing out propelled Captain Lancaster head first out of the still climbing aircraft. He would have been sucked out completely if it hadn't been for his legs catching on the flight controls. But this also disengaged autopilot and sent the plane into a steep decline. The rapid decline sucked First Officer Aitchison to the back of the cockpit, and any crew that attempted to climb into the cockpit also had to fight against extreme G-forces. But all of them knew this could be the end of their flight and the end of their lives, so they fought as hard as they could to get free of the suction. The aircraft picked up speed during its descent because the decompression had caused the cockpit door to collapse inward and jam the throttle controls. First Officer Aitchison struggled to get to the flight controls and correct the plane's course, while crew members grabbed onto Lancaster's legs and piled on top of each other to keep him and themselves from being completely blown out of the plane. Even passengers in the cabin threw themselves onto the pile, holding Captain Lancaster and the crew members in place. It was obvious to all of them that Lancaster must have died. The way his body crumpled against the outside of the plane, and the lack of oxygen getting into his lungs at a rapidly descending 17,000 feet surely should have killed him. At this point in the flight, the crew were merely holding on to him so that he didn't get sucked out and damage the plane's engines or wings any further. With the flight attendants and passengers holding Captain Lancaster in place, First Officer Atchison was finally able to regain full control of the aircraft. He leveled it out at an altitude where oxygen masks would not be needed, and initiated the process of an emergency landing at Southampton Airport. As if the situation could get any worse, however, the runway at Southampton Airport was shorter than others, and there was a great fear that the heavily fueled BAC-111 would not be able to safely land there, and the aircraft did not have the ability to dump fuel in order to save weight. Atchison was left with no other options. This is a section of the transcript for the conversation had between Atchison and air traffic control.
5390, we've been advised it's pressurization failure. Is that the only problem? Negative, sir. The captain is half sucked out of the airplane. I believe that he is dead. Roger, that is copied. The flight attendants are holding on to him, requesting emergency facilities for the captain. I think he's dead.
Atchison began the landing at Southampton Airport, and the entire flight held their breath. He touched down safely at 8:55 local time. The landing took place over half an hour after the flight's initial departure from Birmingham. By this time, Captain Lancaster had been pinned outside the cockpit for more than 20 minutes. His body had been crushed to the airplane wall and, with the rapidity of the plane and the force of the altitude, he had been without oxygen for much of that time. This caused his colleagues to fear the worst about his survival. However, in an unexplained and shocking surprise, Captain Lancaster actually survived the entire ordeal with just a handful of injuries. He suffered frostbite due to the time spent outside of the aircraft, as well as shock, bruising, and a few superficial fractures to his arms, hands, and wrists. But when he was examined by hospital staff, it was discovered that he had no serious injuries. In fact, no one on board the flight that day died or even suffered serious injury. So, what in the world happened? Windows don't just randomly explode on aircraft, after all. Investigators quickly got to work on the alarming incident and soon uncovered an equally shocking cause. This came about after the missing window and many of its 90 bolts were located in Chelsea, Oxfordshire. The village is around 5.5 miles or 9 kilometers from Didcot, the area that the aircraft had been flying over at the time of its decompression. Upon examination, investigators found that the bolts used to hold the windscreen in place were fractions of a centimeter too narrow and short. They had been installed the night before the incident, when engineers changed the windscreen panel during maintenance. While seemingly marginal, this difference meant they could not withstand the air pressure difference between the cabin and the outside at altitude. This difference is what caused the decompression. The investigation highlighted malpractice at British Airways maintenance facility in Birmingham, finding that workers had taken shortcuts to expedite procedures. After the incident, British Airways Flight 5390's crew became highly decorated for their quick thinking and their teamwork. First Officer Atchison and flight attendants Susan Gibbons and Nigel Ogden were awarded the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air for their heroism. Atchison also received a Polaris Award in 1992 for his efforts amid the challenging conditions that faced him. Despite the traumatic event, First Officer Atchison continued flying for another 25 years. He eventually retired in June of 2015 on his 65th birthday. Captain Lancaster returned to flying just 5 months after his harrowing ordeal and retired in 2008. Have you ever heard of this incredible story? Most of the time when it comes to disasters, loss of life is common, but this is one disaster story where everyone in it managed to survive. Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once. Everybody lives. I hope you enjoyed this story. To be notified when I post next, click subscribe and ding the notification bell. I post once a week on this channel. Leave a like and a comment for the YouTube algorithm. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks for watching, and come back soon, Cryptids.